Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our audience members today. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Derrick Barden, and I have the privilege today of interviewing Richard Butcher, Executive Vice President Technical at Goldfields Limited. In his current role, Richard is responsible for supplying technical and operational advice to the CEO and the Executive Committee of Goldfields Limited. His roles also entails being in charge of all group technical functions, including the modernisation of the company via technology and innovation. Richard has over 30 years of experience in mining across the globe and across various commodities, including gold, coal, diamond, nickel, copper, and uranium. During his career, he's held various leadership positions with companies such as MMG, Gencor, Anglo American, and Barrick. Richard also holds a Master's in Mining Engineering. He's a Fellow of the Australasian Institute of Mining and Metallurgy and holds a first-class mine manager's ticket in Western Australia. Richard Butcher, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Richard, would you like to tell the audience where you're joining us from today?
I'm actually sitting in Perth, and I've lived in Perth for over 20 years. So that's pretty much where I am. So I would actually say I'm an international person. Obviously, by my accent, you can see I'm a POM. And I started out in the UK coal mines, and I was a refugee from Margaret Thatcher. And then I went to live in Africa for over 20 years. And now I live in Australia. So I've got a mixture of a family. I've got a South African children, English wife, and Australian in-laws and Australian grandchildren. Wow. So I'm a truly international person.
Yes, and I think it reflects the mining industry in general too. I mean, we're such a mixed variety, aren't we, from all over the place? So.
Yeah.
Yes, but look, just to set the context with our audience here, with regards to Goldfields, could you maybe give us a bit of a brief description to the audience of the level of automation and AI already incorporated at Goldfields currently?
I think really I'm trying to answer that question in a bit of an obtuse manner. I think the first one you would look at, when you look at automation, you look at AI, in particular AI, you have to operate in a data-rich environment. And you have to operate in a data-rich environment and an environment that has infrastructure to supply that data. So I think it's important to make sure you don't put the cart before the horse. Lots of people talk about AI, we talk about deep learning, machine learning, we talk about the cloud, we talk about quantum computing, all these end of type processes. So when you look at what can you apply in terms of AI now, and what can you apply in terms of machine learning or data science now, you have to have now systems that supply the data, because data is the fuel of the AI engine. So that's really what it is. So if you look at what we're currently doing now, I mean, I think the first big project we've done is RPA. You know, when we're looking at some very, very basic RPA book type functions, and we're looking at those in terms of some of our HR processes, certainly in South Deep. So it actually shows if you can use them in South Africa, you can actually use them most people. So we're using those. The other one we're doing is another data-rich area is actually our mills. So if you look at two data-rich areas we have is obviously our process, our HR processes, lots of data. We also have in our mills we have lots of data. So we've currently got projects in our HR system, and we've also got projects on our mills, in particular at Gruyere, where we're looking at mill rock to actually look at what we can do with the actual loadings on the data there. We're also looking at things such as integration and starting with our ABB systems in Serra Corona. So those are the types of things we're doing, because that's where we're data rich, and that's where we can start to actually apply those type of technologies.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess in your current position, you've got control over the direction of where Goldfields is heading in the future. And I guess on your radar, what are some of the current or future requirements for automation and AI for Goldfields, building on what you already currently have?
I think if we look at this way, I mean, what basically Goldfields has done, or what the programs we set out as a company is important to holistically look at this. This is not about innovation and technology. Innovation and technology is a tool. Okay? And you've got to look at this you actually look at that. What we're trying to do is modernize the mining industry for the 21st century. A lot of our mine industry is really the 20th century mine industry. We're trying to modernize, and we're trying to holistically modernize the mine industry for the 21st century. So the first thing we had to do was bring ourselves up to standard in terms of what was the best practice, or what we could consider as the best practice for 20th century. Things such as high precision GPS, semi-co-pilot, or automated remote loading underground, making sure our mills were automated to the best type of standard.
Yep.
If we get rid of them, all the type of valves and what have you, make sure that our CIL plants were upgraded to the best types of standards. Start to look at our digital infrastructure. So those are some of the issues. So we've actually started on those very, very fundamental building blocks. And when we look at our program, we've had three thrusts. One is to get a strategy or a vision. Where does this stuff really go? Right? The other one is to look at our digital infrastructure. None of this works unless you have your digital infrastructure. And the other one is your people. If we look at what happens, if you don't bring your people along with you, and you don't co-design your people along with you, people actually, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more of psychology before technology. So, I mean, our thrust has really been on those aspects, such as increasing the amount of equipment, best practice equipment, CAD, semi-autonomous equipment. In terms of that, in terms of things like semi-autonomous, reasonably full level autonomous type of drills and equipment we've got on. So that's where our thrust has been in terms of, and building digital infrastructure.
Yeah. I have just received a question which I thought was relevant to where we have, so I'll ask it, and hopefully I don't put you too much on the spot, but where do miners look for best practice in holistic modernisation of their mines from other mining companies, met companies, or other industries?
The kind of answer you got to answer, right, you've got to look at that globally. Right? I mean, if you look at we had one of the prominent consultants show us a slide the other day, and it says in terms of digitalization, the mining industry and the construction industry are way down the bottom. And they put such as banks, they put such as supermarkets, they put a whole bunch of people on that kind of pyramid, and lo and behold, right at the bottom, we're right at the bottom of the food chain there. Okay. But I think it's important to realize, to look at this in a holistic fashion. Okay. When we look at these companies who are highly digitized, like your average supermarket's quite highly digitized. Yes. The way you buy your bananas or the way you buy your things, it's quite the amount of artificial intelligence and data science behind those stocking. They're quite transactional in the way they operate. So when we look at this and we look at across our whole value chain, such as our mining, our mill, our support functions, such as accountancy, your HR, you've got to look at across that value chain where we also have who to look at. If we're looking transactionally in the HR accountancy sphere, we would probably look at companies such as supermarkets. Yes. We would probably look at companies such as the banks, because they've actually gone along on that journey already. When we look in terms of mines, and we look in terms of mills, in terms of this best practice today, my view is I would probably look at Sweden as some of the Boliden style mines. Their mining systems and their technical systems are reasonably advanced. One could question where they are on the standard of mining, the actual physical mine, but their technical systems and the way they integrate their technology is a good analog. And it's a good analog from the point of a bulk miner, because many of these things, when people show you the analogs, they show you the BHP, the Rio Tinto, the bulk miners, and they're really a logistical exercise. So when we look at those, I would certainly on the metal side, I'd certainly look at the Swedes, people like Boliden, see what they're doing. Certainly the model we've taken is to look at Grafenberg and what ABB are doing in that area there as well. But on the other side, which is equally as important, the transactional side, I would look at things like the banks. I would look at things like some of our mining companies are actually not bad at that at all. Yeah, right. Certainly we've looked at Fortescue and some of the things they're doing on the transactional side, and they're pretty good. They're pretty best practice. So in terms of the mill side, I think you've got to look at what your process facilities are. Some of our, mills and smelters, and those are industrial plants. So I think we've got some good practice within some of our base metals companies on how you'd automate those and how you digitize those.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. No. I was going to ask, when going back a little bit, you were talking about with regards to setting up the infrastructure, making sure your people were coming along on the journey, as well as having a strategy in place. I guess if you looked at our mining industry in general, how do you think we've handled this digital transformation when you look at across the industry?
I think the bottom line is most people say we've handled it badly. Yeah. But I'm not so sure whether that's a fair comment. I think we've handled it in a very fragmented way.
Yes.
I mean, one of the reasons which is really hampering us about this is there's a bunch of technical things out there and innovation. How do you use it? And how do you use it beyond the technical toy sense?
Mm.
How does that drive key business fundamentals?
Yeah.
How does that make the operator's job better?
Yeah.
And I think in certain industries such as iron ore, where it's a logistical function with port and rail, it becomes very obvious. You can go down the Fremantle docks, have a look how they're in a port. You can look at coal site. You can look at a railway, how you can do an autonomous railway. So those become very, very obvious. Or you have big equipment, it becomes very, very obvious. Where we look at some of the underground metals mines with complex geologies, it doesn't become so obvious.
Yes.
Because of the geological complexity. So if you would say that, I'd say that we're getting there. Some pockets are good, some pockets are moving ahead, but we're still struggling with what does this really mean? And how do we apply it?
Yep. Yep. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. As you say, there's a lot of solutions out there, but if you were to take that attitude of I'll just add as a bolt-on to my system and potentially not look at how it actually interacts with your whole operation, it probably has a short lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. From your own experience, I guess what are the major challenges you guys have experienced when it comes to implementation and innovation of AI and automation?
I think, say we look at this and we look at, I mean, the first one we've really experienced is getting people to understand where we want to go with this.
Mm.
And that sounds really, really quite easy. But I mean, you kind of take someone to Munich to see the Watson computer, and they walk down there and they give you, and it looks really great, and you walk around Munich and you have your beer and your sausage, and you drive in the Watson car, and it's great. And you look at this and you say, that's great, but how do I apply this?
Mm.
So you take someone like the Swedish mines, and you look at this and you say, great, I can understand how the digital stuff would work in our environment. Okay. You take someone to some of the iron ore mines and you'd say, yeah, this looks really great. I can see these guys have moved ahead, but I'm not sure how to apply. So getting people to bolt into a realistic vision of where this takes us. And that's a really difficult point because in many cases, it's an ambiguous journey.
Mm.
And in many cases, you have to put a vision out there, which you probably know maybe not that accurate.
Yeah.
And you have to walk towards that vision. And you have to walk towards that vision together. And I think that's one of the challenges we've had and the challenge which I've found is where we've seen resistance, we've seen resistance in areas where I would never have thought we would have seen resistance to it. I mean, one would think the operators would be resistant, but I've seen resistance from some of our corporate folk as strong as what you would expect it to the operators. And the one I found with the operators, normally if you show them how this will make their job better and what they can do with it, I think then that's the one people can hook into that journey. The other one, which is probably the harder one to deal with, is the people. Once you put all this stuff in, the way in which you work changes. And if you don't change your methods of work or your mind operating systems and the culture which you do, ultimately this thing stalls.
Mm.
And it's, again, that's the harder one to talk about, how you would alter your system. And certainly when I've seen some other companies, people, certainly in the iron ore industry, have used brute force. I've just said, this is the way we're moving, get on board, this is what it is. And so that's how people have done that. And that's obviously got it done, but it's caused problems as well. So I think those are two of the problems. I mean, I think the other one which is more relevant to us, in certainly when we're looking at international operations, is the impact of jobs. I mean, you start to go to African countries or South American countries where the labour is a lot higher than in Australia or some of the European countries. The first thing they say is, we're all losing our jobs. We don't want to do this. And that's, even though people will look at their technology, that is a real thing, is the robots are taking our jobs. And that's one of the things to look at this. That's a highly emotive subject, that you're going to be replaced by a robot, right? Or alternatively, if we can make remote work, why do we need people in Australia? They can be sitting in KL or the Philippines or Japan or wherever it is. And that's a more emotive type of thing you have to deal with. But when you look at the reality of that is no one really wants to come to the mine industry. And the reality of that is there's lots of people who are going to be retiring from the mine industry. We're already facing waves of skill shortage and not getting people. So in many cases, there's a lot of flexibility we have in that, as well as the other one as well is to really look at the point of, most of these things aren't really driven from a point of making people unemployed. They're driven from the point of making us more efficient. Yes. So there's a few things to really think about when we look at these times, but they're very, very emotive subjects. So what does this really mean for me?
Yeah. Look, it's a bit of a balancing act, isn't it, about this automation and balancing people's livelihoods. It's I think definitely a challenge that it'll be difficult to see how it unfolds over the future. I am mindful of time. We are getting close, so I've got 100 questions I wanted to ask you, but I'll have to be very selective in what I ask going forward. I know on today's session, we'll have a number of service providers here, and having you here today, I thought it'd be worthwhile asking this question. Person who makes decisions, what are you looking for from METS companies who offer solutions in this space? What are some of the things that they could put in front of you that would help you in your decision making?
So basically, how oven ready is your technology?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, many cases people say it's oven ready, but when you put it into the thing, it's about 80 to 90%. Now, that's a really important one, because normally if it's 80 to 90% ready, you have to work with the thing to make it work. Yeah. And people say, well, it does work and what have you, but you have to work at it and you have to want to work at it. So the extra 10% of oven readiness is really good. The other one to really look at this is, maybe this stuff works for some boffin in the lab and what have you, and you can do some great things with it. But a lot of cases you're having to get people who don't have a lot of time on the FIFO shift and what have you. So that's the way one is, how oven ready is your technical solution. Yeah. And also the other one as well is, what is the supporting infrastructure you require to make it run?
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, some great points there. No, excellent. Look, we are going to run out of time, Richard. I've really enjoyed it. It is absolutely flown. So first of all, thank you so much for your time today. Your responses have been fantastic. I'd like to personally wish you and Goldfields much success for the future. Also, I guess to our audience, thank you for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed this interview with Richard Butcher, Executive Vice President of Technicals of Goldfields Limited. And look, I just encourage you to continue participating in the other online sessions held within the conference. So until we meet again, stay safe.